Namo Buddhaya. Good morning. Welcome to the Buddha Dharma TV. I am Lisa Chu. We begin our program with Dr. Bante Punaji, an international speaker. He talks about Buddhism, analyzing modern science, psychology, and the psychotherapy. We have already presented several talks by Venerable Dr. Punaji. Many have expressed their eagerness to listen to his sermons. Today, we are presenting another talk by him entitled Awakening from the Dream of Existence. Please listen to it carefully and grasp the deep meaning of the talk. This is the first part of his sermon.
Happy to be present here. There are a lot of Americans here, and this is a place where a lot of interesting activities going on. The chief monk here is a person who is interested in the kind of thing that I am also interested in. Of course, he's from Sri Lanka, and also in an area where we had a university called the Mihidu Sarasavya at Mihintale. And Mihintale is a place where the Arahant Mahinda came to Sri Lanka carrying the teachings of the Buddha. So it's a very historical place where he has been born in. So that's also a great thing. So the topic today is awakening from the dream of existence. Now what that means is we think we are existing. And from the Buddha's point of view, it's only a dream. It's not a reality. You know, there is a school of philosophy in the West that started in the West called existential philosophy. Their main idea that they uphold is existence. There have been many philosophers who have been called existential philosophers, but all these philosophers denied that they are existential philosophers. They didn't like to call themselves existential philosophers. But today, those who write books on existential philosophy, they name them as existentialists. The idea of existence was brought up really by a philosopher called Heidegger, who was a German philosopher. And what they point out is that out of all the animals existing in the world, The human being is the animal that is aware of his own existence. And not only that, the human being is also aware that he or she is going to die, which brings fears, anxieties, and worry. Everyone celebrates birthdays, but when it comes to death, they cry and lament about it. People don't realize that birth and death are the two ends of the same stick, which we call life. So to live is to be born, to die. Is that what we call existence? When we say, I am existing, are you referring to that baby that was born? Or are you referring to that young man or woman who got married? Or are you referring to that old man or woman who dies? You are changing all the time. From the time you are born, it is a gradual process of change. One philosopher said, you cannot enter the same river twice. Why? Because the second time you enter the river, it's a different river. The water is different. It's not the same water. In the same way, we can say we cannot meet the same person twice. Because every second, every moment, all cells that are in our body die and new cells come into being. Because our body is made of cells. So it's a new person. Even the mind is changing. The body is changing. The mind is changing even faster than the body. So are we really existing? When we think of existence, we are thinking of occupying two things, space and time. When we refer to ourselves, what are we talking about? Where is the self? Is it the body that we call the self? Or is it the mind that we call the self? Or is it something else? So we cannot even find out what the self is. Body is the thing that occupies space. The mind is not occupying space. The mind is occupying time. But does it occupy time? What is it that we refer to as mind? Is it a thought that comes into the mind? Is it the thought that we refer to as mind? Or is it a sensation that we refer to as mind? Or is it an emotion that we refer to as mind? There is no such thing as mind. What we call the mind is an activity of the body. When the Buddha spoke of the mind, he used 3 words: Chitta, Mano, and Vijnana. The word Vijnana refers to perception. Perception means seeing is perception, hearing is perception, smelling is perception, tasting is perception, touching is perception. Touch. It's an activity of the senses. We have 5 senses: the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, and the body. The activity of these senses is what we call perception. We are organisms in an environment. Now the environment stimulates the organism through these 5 senses. Light falling on the eye is a stimulation of the eye. Sounds coming to the ear is a stimulation of the ear. Smells coming to the nose is stimulation of the nose. Taste coming to the tongue is stimulation of the tongue. And touch coming to the body is a stimulation of the body. So when the environment stimulates these senses, the body reacts to the stimulus. And the reaction of the body to the stimulus is what we call perception. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. And that is what the Buddha called Vijnana, perception. Once some people came to the Buddha and asked a question. Now we have these 5 senses. What we see with our eye is very different from the sound that we hear with our ears. And the smell that we get from our nose is different from both seeing and hearing. And the taste that we get in the tongue is another different thing. And the touch So what are we really able to know about what we perceive? And how do these things come together? When we think of an object, we are able to see it, we can touch it, or if we tap it, we can hear a sound, but we think there is an object there. So if we think there is an object, how do I know it? Then the Buddha said, the different information that you get, one from the eye, another from the ears, another from the nose, another from the tongue, the different information, all that comes to one place, which he called Mano. Mano was the name given to that center. And today, if we ask a biologist who has studied about the human body, they will say, well, there are nerves going from the five senses, going to the brain. The optic nerve going from the eye to the brain. The auditory nerve going from the ear to the brain. The olfactory nerve going from the nose to the brain. Like that, different nerves carry messages like telephone wires, and the brain begins to think and give a meaning to what you saw or heard or smelled or tasted or touched. Really, the meaning comes from all the organs, and you put everything together. When I say there is a glass of water here, all the information from the different senses are in that. So we form a concept. And today the modern psychologists have a name for that. That is called cognition. Cognition. And cognition means that we have given a meaning to what we saw. So the seeing is only perception. So after the perception comes cognition. So that cognition is also an activity of the body. There is a special part of the brain called the cerebrum. It is the activity of this part of the brain called the cerebrum that what we call thinking. Thinking is an activity of the brain. There is no special thing called a mind to do the thinking. It is the brain that is doing the thinking. And then, according to the meaning you give to that thing that you have cognized, an emotion is aroused. That emotion comes in the form of a liking or desiring, or you dislike what you saw, a hatred, Or you may be frightened of what you saw. Or you may be worried about what you saw. These are emotions. And what is an emotion? If you examine that, that is a complete change in the activities of the body. You ask a biologist or even a doctor, what is an emotion? A message goes from the brain to a gland in the body, and the gland secretes a thing called a hormone into the blood, and the blood begins to carry this to the whole body. When the heart is pumping, the blood carries this to the whole body. And changes begin to take place in the body. If, for example, you are angry, we call it an emotion, but anger is not just an emotion. Anger means the message goes from the brain to a gland called the adrenal gland, and a hormone called adrenaline gets into the blood. And this is carried to the whole body, and changes take place in the activities of the body. The heart begins to beat faster, the breathing becomes heavier, the muscles in the body becomes tensed, blood rushes to the face, the capillaries, the face becomes red, and the muscles in the face also gets distorted, and you begin to look like a devil. You see? So, all these things happen means a change in the body. So what we call an emotion is not a separate thing. It is a change in the body. So these three words that the Buddha used, one is perception, which he called vijnana, and then the cognition, that he called mano, and the emotion, that is called chitta. Chitta. And this emotion, once it is aroused, it doesn't stop there. That emotion is expressed in action, in the form of words or in the form of behavior. And that behavior can, if it is anger, the behavior can come in the form of fighting, quarreling, even killing. And that has bad consequences for the person who is doing it and also for the others who are around. And that is what the Buddha called karma. Karma or kamma. Kamma is the Pali word, karma is the Sanskrit word. So these words today, the modern psychologists are aware of this whole problem. What is that problem called? It was only recently that one psychologist who was also a biologist, who was a professor in Canada, somewhere in Ottawa or Montreal. His name was Hans Selye. I think it's the German name. And he wrote a book called Stress. That is how the word stress came into being. He was the first person to use that word, stress. And today everyone knows what stress is. And they pay a lot of money to learn how to manage stress. And it is this problem that the Buddha brought into the world, pointed out. It is called, the Buddha called it dukkha, today translated as suffering. But it's not just suffering, it is the stress that today people talk about. In other words, the problem is that the human being is an organism in an environment. And the environment stimulates the organism, and the organism reacts to the stimulus. And that reaction is what is called stress. Now, Hans Selye wrote a book called Stress Without Distress. What does that mean? Stress without distress. Now, what that really means is that people think that stress is something happening outside. But what he pointed out was, stress is not something happening outside. Stress is how you react to what is going on outside. It is the reaction of the organism to stimulation by the environment. And that reaction is creating all the problems in the world. This is what that psychologist who really started what is called psychotherapy was Sigmund Freud, who became aware of this reaction, the emotional reaction. And this emotional reaction is creating the problems. Not only crime, not only wars in the world, not only all the terrorism in the world, even inside neurosis, psychosis, and all the mental and physical problems also. So this has to be stopped. This is something that we have to learn to stop. But the problem is that these things are happening without our knowledge. We are not even conscious of what is going on. We are simply organisms in an environment reacting unconsciously, not consciously. It's only once it has happened that we know it has happened. This is why Sigmund Freud realized that if we are going to stop this, we have to become conscious of what is going on. If we are not conscious of what is going on, how can we stop it? And I cannot stop what is going on within you. You have to stop it. So that means one person cannot do for the others. Each person has to do it by himself or herself. It is what is called a do-it-yourself job. You cannot get other people to do it for you. Now, if you are sick, you might be able to go to a doctor and the doctor can do whatever is necessary. But a psychological problem, the doctor cannot do anything. You have to do it yourself. That's the problem. You have to be your own psychologist. Now the Buddha used a word which today people are translating in the wrong way. And that word is avijja. Today they translate that word as ignorance. Avijja is translated as ignorance. This is not ignorance. Avijja is unconsciousness. Everything is going on unconsciously. So we have to become conscious of this. It is only by becoming conscious of this problem that that problem can be solved. You see, when we speak of the mind, there are two important parts of what we call the mind. This is very important for us to understand because we don't normally know this. One part is what we call the thinking part. The other part is what we call the emotional part, the thinking part and the emotional part. Sigmund Freud also was aware of this, and the emotional part he called the id, and the thinking part he called the ego. The id and the ego. Now the Buddha used two words to refer to these two parts. The emotional part he called chitta, and the thinking part he called mano. Today the modern psychologists have two words. One is called the cognitive, the thinking part is the cognitive, and the emotional part is called the affective. The cognitive and the affective. So it is very important to understand that we are having these two parts. Now today, many Buddhists, especially the lay followers or the household followers, they take up what is called the 5 precepts. I hope you know about the 5 precepts. Huh? You should not hurt others or harm others. You should not steal. You should not commit adultery. You should not lie. You should not take intoxicants or hallucinogens and that kind of thing. Now, those are the 5 precepts. But there are really, although it goes in the form of 5 precepts, there are 10 real precepts there. So in any case, when they take up the 5 precepts, or when they recite the 5 precepts, what part of the mind is doing that? Is that done by the thinking part or that emotional part? Normally we have two terms that we use to refer to the thinking part and the emotional part. I forgot to tell you that. The thinking part we call the head, and the emotional part we call the heart. So this head and the heart doesn't mean that it is really the head and the heart. These are two words that we use to refer to the thinking part and the emotional part. So when we recite the 5 precepts, is it the heart doing that or the head doing that? It is the thinking part that is doing that. Because the thinking part is fully aware that it is not good to harm others or hurt others. Because if someone hurts me, I don't like that. So in the same way, other people also don't like to be hurt. And therefore, I decide not to hurt anyone. Or if someone steals from me, I don't like that. In the same way, others will not like if I steal from them. So in a similar way, we think of all the 5 precepts and we begin make a decision not to behave in the wrong way. That is done by the thinking part. But we recite it here in the temple, and we go home, and the husband begins to fight with the wife, or the wife begins to fight with the husband, or maybe both parents begin to fight with the children, or the children begin to fight with the parents, or maybe you begin to fight with your neighbors, and so on, you see. But why? You have taken these 5 precepts. Who is doing the fighting? It is the emotional part that is doing the fighting, not the thinking part. So in other words, our emotions are going in one direction, the thinking is going in the other direction. In other words, we have 2 paths come in conflict. The thinking comes in conflict with the emotion, the head coming in conflict with the heart. This is the problem in the world. Today, with the advancement of modern science and technology, we have created, not even myself, but maybe the scientists have created wonderful things. Computer itself is a wonderful thing. Even this clock is a wonderful thing. Even the electric lights, wonderful. Television. Now people have even gone to the moon. Wonderful things. How did they do it? Through that thinking part. It is the head that is doing all that. But why did the head do that? Why did the head do all those things? It is because the emotions wanted.
Life never dies, although we live in midst of change and death. Only the form shall pass away, and not the Spirit's breath.
Our next presentation is by Dr. Bhante Chandana from the United States of America. He will be speaking on the significance discourse from the holy book Majjhima Nikaya. The Samaditi Sutta, also known as the Discourse on the Right View. His sermon is extensive, and today we will hear the first part of his sermon. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bhante Chandima to share his insights on this important teaching.
For today's sutta, we will be discussing another giant, perhaps one of the biggest giants that we may find in the middle-length discourses. Many people, when they hear the Majjhima Nikaya, the term of the middle-length discourses, they immediately think about Sammaditthi Sutta. For many, it is a vast and deep and complex discourse that tackles the first principle of the Eightfold Path, right view, Samma Ditti. And who better, other than Lord Buddha himself, of course, but who better to be giving it other than the general of the Dhamma, the second in wisdom only to Lord Buddha himself, Venerable Sariputta, the chief disciple. So here we see a discourse where Venerable Sariputta compassionately is delineating, looking at it at the right view, but in the context of the Four Noble Truths. We see how multi-nuanced it is. Oftentimes people just brush off Sammaditthi, yeah, right view. I'm studying the Buddha's teachings, so I'm already, doing the right thing. I'm already on the right path. I agree, yes. I've never come across anyone who disagreed with the Noble Eightfold Path once I've explained to them, or at least delineated, just pointed them out. You will never find anyone who says, well, I don't agree with that. Let's say right action. What is that? Who can say, no, I want to have the engagement of wrong action. I love wrong speech. No one in their right mind would say that. And similarly, when we come to the first principle, without which the whole formula is in shambles, is lost, and that is right view. It is not an intellectual view, we will see. There's something that's called mundane and something that's called supramundane, other than the superficial understanding of something. And here we're going to see Venerable Sariputta explain the different categories of how one may understand. Again, like all of the discourses that we've discussed, at least, if not all of them, throughout the Nikayas, they're geared towards having the listener, the reader, the practitioner, bring the Four Noble Truths into one's own life in a much more coherent manner. where it becomes personal. The Dhamma is very personal. The Dhamma is more personal than your career, than your income, than your reputation. We will also be introduced to the four right efforts, and we see how they will be utilized, used because of their functionality, because they're the sammapadhana, the four right strivings or right efforts, and which is part of the Noble Eightfold Path, yes, but they also have their own breakdown or framework in relation to unwholesome, evil, bad, merit-making actions, bad karma basically, and then in relation to the right efforts that involve the bringing up of the opposite of those types of karma or actions, meaning the good merit-making actions, the wholesome, the skillful actions, willfully committed skillful actions. Because this Dhamma cannot be practiced unless we relinquish the bad karmas that we're engaging in. You will never be able to even come close to understanding the Dhamma, let alone attaining the wonderful states that we keep hearing about, read about in the suttas, if you continue on engaging in wrong actions. Your intellectual understanding of the Dhamma won't cut it. When you're right there in the middle of the crosshairs of an event and a set of conditions that enable you to choose between good or bad actions, and you choose the bad one, your whole intellectual career in studying, exploring, memorizing the Dhamma mean nothing. Because the moment of death, when it arrives, it will find you in poverty when it comes to good merit-making actions, kusala kamma, wholesome actions. And those wholesome actions come because of their purifying quality in establishing you in a place of tranquility, where there isn't that fighting and anxious or agitated state of mind. Why? Because you've spent a lifetime preparing your mind by choosing, by understanding as to why I am engaging in this path that is difficult versus the easy. To commit an action that is evil, to commit an action that is unskillful or unwholesome is so easy. To heal, it takes time. To harm, to hurt, it's so easy. It just takes a moment of careless attention or inattention. What does that mean it's lacking? It means that it's lacking sammaditthi. So sammaditthi is not something for some people some of the time. Sammaditthi for all people all the time in all sets of conditions, because we're always making, whether we like it or not, some choices. In the way we allow the mind to hover or go and just like a kite that's been let loose, and the wind comes and blows it away. That's where the mind is usually, somewhere, weaving newer and newer scenarios of papanchas, newer scenarios of more and more unwholesome states. That's why fear comes, worries never leave, and new ideas and new desires that are led by the three kileshas, the defilements, greed, hatred, and delusion. That's what one's own actions are guided by. And because of these three, we have the 10 unwholesome actions committed by the mind, committed by the speech, 3 committed by the mind, 3 committed by the body, 4 committed by the tongue, by speech. Tongue could also be digital. The things that we send to someone in email, the comment we text, we gesture. We don't have to be using actual words. Whether it's gossiping, lying, changing the truth to fit our own agendas, engaging in frivolous speech, backstabbing, type of conversation that breaks people apart, that love being together. So that's just one example of the 10 unwholesome actions that are based on the 3 defilements within the heart, the kilesas. Sometimes I say kilesa, sometimes people are confused, but earlier in my studies, the teachers that I've had were primarily Sri Lankan bhikkhus. And in Sri Lanka, whenever they study, they also are highly influenced by Sanskrit pronunciation of the Pali terms, which is very odd. So sometimes they would say kilesa, but with a Sanskrit influence. So that's something that's left over from that part of my past. But it's kilesa, term. Anyhow, it's a long sutta, not very long, but still, I don't want to be rushing through it. But it's a deep sutta, so I highly recommend you pay close attention and do look at the PDF available. One day I'm hoping that once this is done, it might be printed, perhaps. People would have these suttas at least printed. Anyhow, again, this is from the Majjhima Nikaya, Middle Length Discourses, Sutta number MN9, Majjhima Nikaya number 9. And it comes from the first grouping of the Majjhima Nikaya, groupings of suttas or discourses, and it's the Mula Pariyaya Vagga. Mula Pariyaya is also, by the way, the name of the first sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, which is truly a giant. In fact, it is the quintessential elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, because people don't know what to do with it. It's so complex, but it's so simple looking, simple sounding. So for that reason, many teachers just avoid having the students even read up on it or read it, become familiar with it. Instead, they would tell them more of the colorful suttas that come, after the Sambhasala Sutta, etc. But anyhow, that is also one of the suttas I would like to cover with you one of these days, if and when I get to translate that fully. So it's from that section, which is the earliest part of the sections of the Majjhima Nikaya. It is called Sammaditthi Sutta, Discourse on Right View. Let's begin. I have personally heard this. During the time when the Blessed One was staying at the monastery offered by Anathapindika in Jeta's Park, in the city of Savatthi, the Venerable Sariputta addressed his fellow bhikkhus and said, "Friends, bhikkhus." "Yes, friend," those bhikkhus replied. And the Venerable Sariputta continued, "Friends, the term right view is often mentioned. But what does it mean when a noble disciple is said to possess right view? The one whose view is unmistakably accurate. Someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma. The one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. Indeed, friend, we would come from far and wide to learn the meaning of this statement from the Venerable Sariputta. Now, it would be wonderful if the Venerable Sariputta clarified the meaning of these questions. On hearing it, from the Venerable Sariputta, the bhikkhus will thus learn and carry it in their hearts. In that case, friends, this is Venerable Sariputta responding, listen carefully. Please listen carefully as you apply your mind's attention properly to what I will share with you here. Yes, friend, the bhikkhus responded, and the Venerable Sariputta continued by saying, usually, if you noticed, a few of the suttas that we've covered where Venerable Sariputta is the main protagonist, as it were, the expositor, the one who's explaining the Dhamma. Usually you have a Q&A situation. Here, Venerable Sariputta is the one who instigated it, who's starting this, who's asking the question and placing it in front of the bhikkhus, his fellow bhikkhus, so that he offers them the explanation. So usually you would have another person, another bhikkhu, namely another arahant, by the way, Venerable Mahakotita, if you remember. He was also very, very wise. So he would strategically position questions so that he would gather his own students, he would bring them over with him to visit Venerable Sariputta, and he would ask these questions as if he were not an arahant. And some people might think that he was not an arahant, but actually he was. But he was asking those specific questions for the sake of his students and anyone present there who was not yet an arahant, because of the value of the intricacy of the explanations, the specially beautiful explanation that Venerable Sariputta was known to provide to questions like this. So here we don't have that, although in some of the other versions in the I think in the Agamas you have this sutta, but it's actually being instigated. The question is coming from Venerable, I think, Venerable Mahakotita. Anyhow, they're both in that sutta. But I go back to the Pali. It's more valid for me, more verifiable, more authentic, I could say. But that's my opinion, of course. Anyhow, let's move forward. Distinguishing what is unskillful from the skillful. This is the heading that I chose for this, and let's go. Whenever, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that are unskillful, he does so carefully. That means whenever somebody's looking at a phenomenon that is akusala. Kusala means wholesome or skillful. Akusala means unskillful, unwholesome, bad. So he does so carefully while observing, looking at things, as he comes to also see the very root of the unskillful, seeing their connection clearly. So it's not just the superficial appearance of this being unskillful. That's not enough. A noble disciple has to go a little bit beneath it, go deeper than what meets the eye. You need to look for the very root of the unskillful. Similarly, while looking at things that are skillful, he does so carefully as he comes to also see the very root of the skillful, seeing their connection clearly. In this manner, he would be declared a noble disciple who is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. That is one of the reasons why no noble disciple accepts or knows the true Dhamma simply because Lord Buddha said it. That's a fact. Venerable Sariputta was known for that. When he was questioned by a very famous Brahmin, Venerable Sariputta said, the question was basically, you accept it because he's your teacher, right? And Venerable Sariputta said, no, I know this to be true by myself, by my own examination, investigation. I know this to be true. It's totally separate from Lord Buddha having said it. I don't believe it because he said so. Which religious practice has that within it, teaches that? Well, this one does. Personally verifiable. Now, friends, what is meant by unskillful and what are the very roots of the unskillful? Similarly, what is meant here by skillful and what are the very roots of the skillful, which the noble disciple is looking at? Killing living beings, friends, is unskillful. Stealing and taking things that are not given to oneself is unskillful. Engaging in sexual misconduct is unskillful. Speaking falsehood is unskillful. Gossiping and using malicious speech is unskillful. Using harsh and destructive speech is unskillful. Engaging in idle and frivolous chatter is unskillful. Living with and having covetousness and longing in the heart is unskillful. Having anger and ill will is unskillful. Possessing wrong view in one's heart is unskillful. The last one is especially important. All of them are important, obviously, because this was actually the 10 unwholesome or unskillful kammas, actions, akusala kammas. But here, the last one that Venerable Sariputta pointed out, possessing wrong view in one's heart is truly unskillful. Wrong view, contrast that with right view. Sometimes people say, well, what is right view? Well, understanding the Noble Eightfold Path. That's a good start. Right view is not just saying, oh, I bow down to Lord Buddha. Yes, yes, I'm a Buddhist, or I respect Buddha. I have his quotes. Something like that. But that means nothing when your life is being led by wrong view, as demonstrated by the lack in right speech. It's not there. There is wrong speech, there is wrong action, there is wrong effort. There's wrong mindfulness, there is wrong meditation. There's wrong livelihood. Why? Because right view is not there. If right view is missing, the whole thing is falling apart. It's impossible for it to turn into right effort when the right view is missing. So they come together. All these, friends, are called unskillful. And what, friends, is meant by the very root of the unskillful? Having greed in the heart is the root of the unskillful. Having hatred in the heart is the very root of the unskillful. Having delusion in the heart is the very root of the unskillful. These three combined, therefore, are called the very roots of the unskillful. These are the kilesas I mentioned: lobha, dosa, moha. Greed, hatred, or avarice, delusion. These three are at the root. They are the roots, sometimes called also the poisons, the three poisons you've heard me say before. And what, friends, is meant by skillful, and what are the very roots of the skillful? Abstaining from killing living beings, friends, is skillful. Abstaining from stealing or taking things that are not given to oneself is skillful. Abstaining from engaging in sexual misconduct is skillful. Abstaining from speaking falsehood is skillful. Abstaining from gossiping and the use of malicious speech is skillful. Abstaining from using harsh and destructive speech is skillful. Abstaining from engaging in idle and frivolous chatter is skillful. Not living with nor having covetousness or longing in the heart is skillful. Not having anger or ill will is skillful. Possessing right view in one's heart is skillful. All these, friends, are called skillful. And what, friends, is meant by the very root of the skillful? Having non-greed in the heart is the very root of the skillful. Having non-hatred in the heart is the very root of the skillful. Having non-delusion in the heart is the very root of the skillful. In Pali, you just add the prefix a, and that is the alobha, adosa, amoha. These three combined, therefore, are called the very roots of the skillful. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that are unskillful, he does so carefully. He comes to also see the very root of the unskillful, seeing their connection clearly. Similarly, while looking at things that are skillful, he does so carefully, as he comes to also see the very root of the skillful, seeing their connection clearly. Then he abandons and lets go of the underlying drive for passion or lust. He removes the underlying drive for having dislike or resistance. In Pali, it's patigha, resistance. And he completely uproots from his heart the underlying drive for bearing the conceit I am or am, mana. These basically bring about the defilements, in a sense. The anusayas, the underlying tendencies, anusayas. So when a person is looking at things that are unskillful and carefully observing to see what their roots are or what its root is, that is a person who's not going to be so apologetic or forgiving of having or maintaining bad habits. What Venerable Sariputta is referring here to is a person who is not on automatic pilot. This is why we practice our observational skills, namely through sati and sampajanya, mindfulness and full awareness of where we are, what we're doing, how we're processing, what we are thinking, where we are coming from with this sentence that I'm about to say. The compelling force behind me wanting to reach over and do this. Where am I coming from? This requires you to freeze everything for a moment and look at the nature of the action that is about to be committed, meaning you're looking at the intentionality of it. Where is this coming from? You're looking at the root. This is not a person who is absent-minded. This is not a person who's functioning by habit, which is what majority of the planet does. Majority of beings do, in fact. Because you are not impulsively doing things anymore. Thus, by leaving behind ignorance and gaining true knowledge within himself, he puts an end to suffering here within this very life of his. Ignorance is left, true knowledge is gained. This is something you're going to see and hear. Ignorance and knowledge cannot coexist. The whole diversity sham that's going on in the world doesn't function here. Ignorance and knowledge, true knowledge, cannot coexist. Wisdom and being dumb don't go together. Kusala and akusala will never work together. There's no inclusionary tactics there. One of them has to go, say bye-bye. If you want to become an arahant, if you want to see, then you need to stop doing stupid things, stupid choices. Bad habits have to be dropped. Ignorance has to be let go of, has to be killed, eliminated, destroyed. It is in this manner, friends, that a noble disciple is said to possess right view. The one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. In listening to these words spoken by the Venerable Sariputta, the fellow bhikkhus became quite delighted as they exclaimed, "Sadhu, friend." Sadhu means I agree with that, wonderful, may it be so. You're showing, that you concur, obviously, and that you're also delighted by what you heard. Next section, understanding the role of nourishment. Now, Venerable Sariputta is going to be talking about the aharas. Ahara are the nourishments, or sometimes in English translated as nutriments. And we're going to see Venerable Sariputta apply right view. So looking at the nutriments, the four nutriments, through the prism or through the lens of right view. Then the bhikkhus proceeded to ask the Venerable Sariputta a further question, as they said, "But friend, could there be another way of describing a noble disciple, other than one who possesses right view, whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma?" Yes, friends, there could be another way of describing a noble disciple. Whenever, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully, as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin or arising of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment. Do you see a pattern here? Do you see the underlying formula? He just used the Four Noble Truths, like he did earlier. You have to be able to apply the Four Noble Truths into every single aspect of your life. If you have a headache, ask yourself, what is this? Is it delightful or is it painful? It's painful. Okay. Is it suffering, or what is painful? Is it suffering, or it's heavenly, pleasing? No, it's suffering. Okay. Where does suffering come from? Where does dukkha come from? Well, from holding on tightly to something, craving something. Yes, you could say it's from ignorance. Yeah, but you're ignorant of the fact that you're clinging onto something, grabbing onto something so tightly. Well, what could that be at that moment? You can ask. What you're doing is you're applying the second noble truth. You're looking for samudaya, point of origin. Why am I hurting so much? Sometimes it's biological, sometimes because you're holding on to something else, like getting rid of the pain, or having this meeting go faster, or getting the results that you want, and you're running impatient. The moment you see that's taking place, suddenly something else happens, and there's a release of that. There's an ending, even momentarily, of that suffering. You just are tasting the third noble truth. You see how it's working. The Four Noble Truths have to be applied in every nook and cranny of your life to bring happiness and peace and tranquility and sanity and wisdom into your life. You don't use it, that means there's no right view in your life. That means you're not practicing the teachings of Lord Buddha, period. That's it. But let's see what Venerable Sariputta says about nourishment. In this manner, he would be declared a noble disciple who is said to possess right view, the one whose view is unmistakably accurate, someone who has in his heart the unshakable and personally verifiable faith and confidence in the Dhamma, the one who has finally attained to the true and genuine Dhamma. Now, friends, what is meant by nourishment? This is important because some people don't know what it is. What is ahara? What is the origin and arising of that which nourishes? What is the ending and cessation of the nourishment? And what is the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment? Again, the Four Noble Truths we just saw. Samudaya. Before that, dukkha, the truth of the satya of dukkha, the satya of origination, Satya of Nirodha. Satya meaning the truth, Arya Satya. And then Arya Satya, noble truth of the Magga, the path. But he's using the nourishment principle here, a very important part of the teachings. There are, friends, these 4 kinds of nourishment that are necessary to sustain living beings who have already taken birth, as well as to give support to those beings who are yet to be reborn and are thus still seeking a new form of becoming in various realms. That doesn't mean that they're in a state of limbo somewhere, you know, between lives. There's no such thing in the teachings of Lord Buddha. You do have that later on in the Tibetan tradition, like the Bardo Todol and other things, which are not Buddhist at all. But we don't have that. So in between lives, that's what this is in reference to. Somebody who's about to die, and they haven't, it might be a few milliseconds. Or those who have already been born. They need nourishment. A baby that's just been born, a puppy that's just been born, they need certain nourishments, right? But not just those, all the way until the end of one's life. You need nourishments, some more than others. And what are these 4 nourishments, friends? First is the nourishment of edible food that is consumed, whether solid or liquid, coarse or refined. Secondly, the nourishment of contact. Thirdly, the nourishment of intentional thinking. And fourthly, the nourishment of consciousness or sense awareness. Everyone understands the first part, the edible food. When you're injured or you've been operated upon in the hospital, or you're running low on energy or nutriments or nourishment, they will set you up with an IV, right? In vitro, they will take, an IV bag and hook you up so that you will get that plasma coming in or sugar water. Everyone understands that. But the second one, phassa, contact, how is that a nutriment? How is that? When you hear a sound, but you don't see the source of it, and you're standing by the window, and it came through the window, the sound, or you can tell, what do you immediately want to do? Turn over and see. That's a very simple example of contact. We want to touch things, whether it's through the tactile perception, through the body, through the eyes, ears, hearing, listening, nose, of course, tongue, the body, but especially the mind. We love ideas. That is why it's such a difficult thing to get rid of perceptions, as we saw in the Puttapada Sutta. How the noble disciple who's really in training, wanting to go to the higher and higher and higher states of consciousness, in a sense, or perception, and to be free from that, is something that you find in this Dhamma and discipline, where you have an advanced meditator to even get sick of having perceptions, intentions, abhisankaroti, cetana, and just to be relinquished and be done, at least in those states of cessation. That means the person does not want to have anything to do with these contacts, well, especially the one that's coming next, mano sanchetana, intentional thinking, which is the third ahara. This is very subtle to detect, but every one of us experiences this. Every living being is experiencing these. Now, it's only a matter of how much effort is being applied in effort here, specifically in relation to yoniso manasikara, wise reflective attention. wise reflection, basically, to put your attention to the tiniest little movements, especially one very good way of discovering or noticing Mano Sanchetana as a nutriment, as a nourishment, as an ahara in your living experience is when there is far less noise than usual in your mind, less distractions in your life. One I think, a very wonderful suggestion here would be to those moments, those gaps between your sleep, when you're waking up, something happened and you have to readjust your bed, your pillow, yourself, or you have to get up momentarily, observing the very first thought vibrations that happen, or emotional needs, something that compels you to move. Looking at that, probing that very carefully, you will come to actually make contact with Mano Sanchetana, which are very much related to Sankharas, by the way, which are also very difficult to detect. But the more you do this, the more you see that. These are not things that are in books or in a supermarket you go and just get a pack of. No, these are experiential realities to be experienced by you, basically. And the fourth one is a more intelligible nourishment, one could say, and that is the consciousness, specifically the 6 consciousnesses. And they're very much related. So sometimes you could say that contact, Mano Sanchetana, and Vijnana, this one, the fourth one, are aspects of the same phenomenon. Aspects. When you smell a delicious food, are you happy with just the smell? Something in you says, oh, I wonder how it tastes like. Already your tongue is starting to, you're starting to salivate. When you even think about food, digestion has begun. The stomach is getting ready. The chemistry inside the stomach is changing, preparing. Enzymes are being prepared on your tongue, around your lips, inside your esophagus. Why? Because you're detecting. So there's all kinds of, and contact hasn't technically happened yet. But vijnana is happening. Why? The mind is working, because the mind is the go-between in all of the other 5 senses, the 5 vijnanas. It rules over all. It's like, if you've ever followed Lord of the Rings, the one ring that brings them all, the one ring that controls them all or destroys them all, that's it, the mind. Mano Vijnana. Because you take that off commission, the mind consciousness, everything else is going to be offline, as they say. So, these are the 4 types of nourishment that are necessary to sustain living beings who have already taken birth, as well as to give support to those beings who are yet to be reborn and are thus still seeking a new form of becoming in various realms. It is with the arising and presence of craving that there is the arising of nourishment. Aha! So now we are being introduced to craving, tanha, that constant thirst, wanting, that's never satiated. That's why you want to look over. And even if that noise happened a few times already and you looked and you saw the source of it, it happens again. Guess what? The head wants to turn because the mind says, yeah, I'm curious. Let's find out. What is it being led by? Craving. Craving, if it is present, it means something else is not present. Or at the very least, restraint is not present. Because you're allowing craving to take the reins and just lead you anywhere it wants. How's that going to bring wisdom into the scene, into your mind, into your heart? There's no yoni sumanasikara because there's no sati. When craving rules, you cannot say, well, I'm aware of my craving, Bhante. I know I'm very much mindful of my lust. What? Yes, you have many, 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 many Buddhists who do that. We see here that's not the case. However, with the ending of craving, there is the ending and cessation of nourishment. Now we are looking at the third, right? Cessation, whenever you hear cessation or nirodha, that is a reference also to the third noble truths, right? But whenever you see cessation, you're also going to be what? What's coming next in the next corner? Magga, the fourth noble truth, which has to explain to you what are the means by which cessation takes place. It's not happening mystically by some magical power somewhere, by some divine being. None of that. It requires work. It requires us to apply the Noble Eightfold Path. That's what's coming. Meanwhile, the path that leads to the cessation of nourishment is none other than the application and practice of the Noble Eightfold Path. That is, right view, right intentional thought, right intentional thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, right samadhi. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of nourishment. Earlier, I gave you that suggestion of one example of let's say, when the mind is quieter and you wake up, let's say, in the middle of the night, and you're observing, and you've gotten your sati to such a level that you're able to detect the finest nuances, or finer nuances. Let's say you can't, for some reason, and you're instead creating agitation, because too much virya is going to create agitation. Why? Because now you just added samudaya of craving, second noble truth. Because it's not happening, folks. I have to get this. I want to know this nutriment that Bhante talked about. How come it's not happening? You're just creating what? Dukkha, first noble truth. So immediately drop your quest for experiencing the nutriment of Mano Sanchetana, let's say, and look at what you're doing and what it's creating. You're creating friction, heat, pain. That's the point of origin. And then what do? You're applying, as you see this, all of a sudden it lets go. There's a release, there's a cessation, and now you have a clearing. Now you can approach it fresh. And you are applying right mindfulness, Noble Eightfold Path. So fourth noble truth does not mean you have to always be applying the Noble Eightfold Path, all 8 of them, given the situation. Some might argue, yes, you are doing it. Okay, fine, but they will be in different gradations. There will be a predominance of one, given the context, given the situation, given the need at that juncture. And when, friends, a noble disciple looks at things that nourish, he does so carefully as he comes to see and understand the very role of nourishment. That is, he understands the nourishment itself, the origin and arising of that which nourishes, the ending and cessation of the nourishment, and the path that leads to the cessation of the nourishment. That's Four Noble Truths.
I'd never die, although we live in midst of change and death. Only the form shall pass away, and not the Spirit's breath. The consciousness can never die, although it seems to fade. It does not pass to other forms which thought and act have made. There is no death, all nature cries, the rosary appears. This feather will walk up and in after the winter drear.
Well, that ends today's program. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact us at info@buddhadharmatv.com. We work hard to share the noble, peaceful, and sublime teachings of Buddha with you, and helping you pursue the spiritual path under his wisdom. Please encourage and support those interested in the rational and enlightened teachings of the Buddha. Thank you for watching the Buddha Dharma TV. Good night. Namo Buddhaya.